Hey all. So week 5 of Summer of Pain just dropped. We have this Venom. Scrolling through these nodes. Basically, there's just a bunch of stuff telling me that he's going to be absolutely stacked and I cannot let him hit me. Line there saying that we can't power lock him or drain him. And then this setup and spike node. This is by far the biggest obstacle because it means basically that if you knock him down without those 7 debuffs, because it says more than 6, not 6 or more. If you knock him down with fewer than 7 debuffs up, you're going to take a bunch of damage, because all of these Summer of Pain fights have like 14, 15,000 attack, and on top of that, Venom is going to be stacking Furies the whole time. So basically, you're either going to want to never throw specials or heavies, or you're going to want a ton of debuffs. Now, first up, I'm looking over my tech champions. I'm thinking, well, maybe Guardian could do this but only with basics, but that sounds awful. Ghost could probably do the same. With Sentinel, I'm thinking maybe you could throw L2s into his block once you build Analysis. I'm sure there will be people who end up doing that. Nebula could theoretically work, but the amount of block damage you'd take building her just doesn't sound fun. Guillotine 99, with enough luck on those degens, absolutely can hit that, and obviously her damage once she hits 100 combo is solid anyway. I don't think Howard would work, because it would be very tricky to stack 7 armor breaks before that first heavy, and you'd lose them every time. Maybe Howard with Resonate will be able to do this before the end of it. So then I got down to these last few. Now, Silver Centurion unduped could probably work, because then he could stack enough actual debuffs. But I don't know if he would work Awakened, because then they all become passives and they won't count towards setup and spike. Maybe he can still do it, just by like sheer damage over time, but it doesn't sound like an ideal option. Stark Enhanced Spider-Man actually satisfies one of the other objectives, the Spider-Verse one, and he's who I'll be making my first attempt with, because while we won't be able to use his heavy or his specials, and so we won't get that big shock damage, we will be able to just do a ton of damage on basics once we stack Poise. So I'm going to go for that. It is possible that you could get away with throwing his L3 because it reduces ability accuracy, and maybe that would avoid setup and spike, but I really would not recommend it, unless you are like trapped in the corner and about to die anyway. Ultron might be able to do this. I don't know exactly how many bleeds he's able to stack. I don't know that I'd bet on that one. Star-Lord should be able to do this in the same way that Stark Enhanced Spider-Man can. And then that last one is interesting. I actually think that Yondu could do this, because if you haven't played a duped Yondu before against a node like this, he basically doubles the debuffs on the opponent every time they throw their special. And he also can steal armor ups, which Venom will have a lot of. So if you end up inflicting enough bleeds with Yondu, which is just going to happen on your basic attacks, then when Venom throws his specials, he's going to proc those weaknesses, which have a decent duration. And if you can stay aggressive, then in Venom's next special attack, those weaknesses proc additional weaknesses. I've taken fights with my Yondu before, because I have a 455, where I've actually stacked up to 99 weaknesses before. Now, this has the obvious benefit of reducing the block damage that you take, or, God forbid, the actual damage if you eat a combo. But the other thing that it will allow him to do is that Yondu's special 2 does more damage based on how many specials have been thrown throughout the fight. And since Venom's probably going to be throwing a lot of specials, if you can get him up to those 7 or more debuffs and then throw, basically just spam the special 2, you might be able to do some really serious damage here. So, I don't know how many people have ranked Yondus. Maybe I'll try that later in the week, but it seems like a bit of a dark horse option. Moving on to our Spider-Verse heroes, this is a much, much smaller group, right? There are only 7, or at least there are only 7 available as 6 stars, because that's how I have this filtered. And looking at this, None of them stack a ton of debuffs except Spider-Ham. If you get good luck with his Porker Poppers, I think he's going to be an absolutely fantastic choice, especially because he doesn't necessarily need to throw his specials with those. And so if you end up getting enough of those, I mean, Venom's going to detonate them whenever he throws his specials. Maybe you never need to throw one of yours because the power stings are just going to do enough on their own. But if you got up to 7, you could potentially throw a special. He also has a couple different flavors of taunt, which may or may not work. You're probably not going to be throwing the special one, so you won't get that one. But I really think that he's a strong contender here. Stark Enhanced Spider-Man we already talked about. The others I just don't think are going to work very well. You're not going to be able to safely throw specials with Miles or Spider-Gwen or OG Spidey. Symbiote Spider-Man technically satisfies 2 of the objectives, the same as Stark Enhanced, but his only debuffs are accessible 1 or 2 at a time on his heavy. I think it's only 1 at a time, and so you're never going to be able to stack 7 of them because every time you knock Venom down, he's going to purify them. He does have that guaranteed crit on his L2, but you're going to take a ton of damage for using it. So yeah, I really think out of these, the only options that aren't going to be extremely painful are going to be Spider-Ham and Stark Enhanced Spider-Man. So unfortunately, that's a short list. So next up we have our symbiotes. No double dippers here beyond Symbiote Spider-Man, as there are no tech symbiotes. But we do have more options for debuffs. I wouldn't use Agent Venom, Venom Pool, or Venom the Duck, in case anybody was thinking of that. Carnage seems possible, but very difficult, because the way that I normally am familiar with playing him is getting that long bleed on the heavy, and then using that to stack a bunch of other bleeds, and then that would be safe, but you can't safely throw the heavy until you have those 7 bleeds. And until you get those 7 bleeds up, you're not going to be able to throw any of his specials, which means that you're not going to be able to gain any of his buffs, and you're stuck with his pre-ramp-up stats, which are pretty garbage. So that seems possible, theoretically, but not a fun option. Red Goblin, I know, can inflict a lot of incinerates. I think Spinnaker had said he was having some trouble getting enough debuffs up even with the incinerates for that to count. But maybe that's one of those where Red Goblin with Resonate, if you have that unlocked, would do the trick. I'm honestly not sure. Symbiote Supreme, you're pretty much going to be relying on luck with those bleed procs to be able to safely throw your specials, but Stagger does get around Mystic Ward, and he does damage on stackers, so there is a pretty good chance that he will be able to just chunk Venom down eventually. I think he's probably one of the best options, honestly. And then we have Venom himself, who applies bleeds on crits, and basically the way I would play this is I would definitely have Deep Wounds maxed if possible, same as with Symbiote Supreme, and I just would not throw specials until I had 7 bleeds up. And if that meant that I never threw a special, then I would never throw a special. Which means that's probably going to be a very long fight. And honestly, if I started out and I stacked up like 4 physical resists and 2 armor ups, I think I would quit out and come back. If you're using Venom for this fight, I just would not bother unless you get some decent buff RNG, get some Furies and some Precisions, because Venom has both adaptive and his natural armor up and physical resistance, and you're going to need to crit to do damage. So with that, let's go ahead and look at the actual fight. Like I said, this is my first try with Stark Enhanced Spider-Man, because I figure that he's probably going to be my best option overall, and he's going to satisfy 2 of the objectives. Right away, we notice he takes over 1,000 damage on his first parry before Venom is ramped up at all. So we're going to do our best to not block again. Notice that I also, even though I don't have any poise right away, I've focused on immediately backing Venom up. Because back when Spark, as I call him, back when Spark was very popular in the war meta, One of the most one of the most frequent errors you saw that led to deaths with him was that people would try to stack a bunch of poise at the beginning of the fight, and they would get backed up into their corner, and they wouldn't be able to handle something. And especially since I already figured out how hard Venom is going to hit on block. Look, there I accidentally blocked part of his L1. We don't want that to happen. So the most important thing is back Venom up to his corner, and whenever he doesn't have a bar of power or whenever he gives us an opening, we are going to hit into his block to keep him backed up, and then slowly build poise as he allows us to beyond that. Now you'll notice that I am using some backdraft intercepts here. Another huge block tit. We really have to limit those. But you'll notice that I am using some backdraft intercepts here, specifically with mediums. When he first came out, Spark had probably the best moveset for medium intercepts in the game, and it's still one of the best. So that is fairly safe, but I am mostly not doing intercepts unless Venom is backed up to his corner, because that makes it safer. There's still a small chance that he will idle forward and light attack me, especially if I end up doing too many of those backdraft intercepts in a row. I've noticed that the AI kind of seems to learn from getting hit in the face a bunch if you do that too much. But as long as we spread it out and combine that with taking advantage of whenever he throws a heavy and hitting into his block to keep him backed up, keep him aggressive, and also to build his power so he throws more specials, then we should be able to mix in those backdrafts. See, there's another one. He did idle forward there, so that was the riskiest thing so far. That kind of reinforced everything else I was talking about. We need to throw those in because otherwise this fight's going to take too long and I'll probably mess up, but we need to be careful with them. So you notice there's another one. That time I kind of waited a little bit to make sure he was charging. That's a difficult skill to learn if you're not used to backdraft intercepts, but it really helps against champions like this, and it can save you against the idle light attack problem if your reflexes are fast enough, which honestly mine often aren't. But Spark is an old friend. I haven't used him in a long time, but he was one of the best warfighters in the game for a very long time. I actually didn't have him then, but I critiqued so many other fights when I was doing officer work of people using him that it kind of feels like I've had him longer than I have. Anyway, you can see that we are obviously winning the HP race here. Venom has a ton of buffs. We don't want to block many more hits, but we are still doing good damage. Now, even though we're winning the HP race, when I say that we don't want to block more hits, I mean that specifically we want to stay above 50%. We don't want to just stay ahead of where his health bar is. We want to stay above 50% because while duped, Spark has extra crit rating per poise charge as long as he's above 50%. Below 50%, it just turns into an increased chance to evade, which is useless against Venom because we can't evade against him at all. And if we stop landing critical hits as often, then those 14 physical resistances and those 2 armors are going to really cause us problems. Watch how much damage our combos are doing when we don't crit. I mean, 1,000 on a medium is still respectable, but 6,000 is much better. So notice there I didn't go for a backdraft. Didn't feel like it was safe. You kind of have to trust your instincts on that. I just backed off, waited for him to block, hit into his block to take him to his next bar of power, then dodge that, and then I did a backdraft. Like I said, you're going to want to mix it up, and there you saw the slight hesitation as I waited for him to charge. You want to mix these things up for this fight. But if you don't feel comfortable doing that, then the alternative is to just play it super safe and basically only do what I did right there, where you back off, wait for him to block, hit into his block, and just respond to his specials and punish them, and punish when he throws heavies, which you can kind of bait by blocking strategically. I'm not really good at explaining that, but a lot of you will know what I mean. So we have him down under 10% here, haven't blocked a hit in a while, so we're still over 50%. At this point, if we dropped below 50%, I would be pretty confident in my ability to end it anyway, but I don't want to risk that. 200 hits, though, without the ability to throw those big special twos. I mean, this is a 5-star, so keep that in mind, but this is just a slow fight. Like I said, I anticipate this being even slower with my 5-star Venom. Let's see, one more combo if we crit should do it. And last hit. There we go. So that's 227 hits for the solo. Definitely not the easiest one of these that I've done so far, but very doable, and I think that this one would be extremely safe with a couple revives. And as I've said before, there's no shame in reviving, because you can just use the time that you would have used going for a solo, farming more revives. But good luck to all of you. Let me know in the comments who you used. I suppose one thing I didn't go over is if you're just going for the clear, if you're not Thronebreaker and you don't have access to the objectives, then you do have some other options. If you could potentially use Claire throwing her special one into his block to proc those debuffs. That just sounds very scary to me. You could also use, I've seen Longshot throwing his L2 into the block for similar reasons, applying that Fate Seal, which is technically separate from the Nullify, and then you should just melt him. So there's some skill involved in that setup, but it should work extremely well. And then other than that, you have all of the options of just people who stack a ton of debuffs. Like Gwenpool, I saw somebody using Black Widow Deadly Origin. Anybody who stacks a bunch of debuffs should work great. You could probably even do this with Void and never throw a special. Just play the long game. So like I said, let me know who you use, let me know who you're planning to use. What do you think of this week's fight? Catch y'all next time. Hope this helped.